Hello, everyone, and welcome to Kilowatt, a podcast about electric vehicles, renewable energy, autonomous driving, and much, much more. My name is Bodie, and I am your host. And on today's episode, we are going to talk about delivery numbers. It's the beginning of Q3 2025. So, automakers are releasing their numbers for Q2 2025, and we got some good news for some automakers and not so good news for others. So, before we get into that, though, we do need to thank the patrons who are sponsoring this particular show. They are Steve S., Bruce W., Isaiah J., Howard, and Bruce C. So, thank you to you fine folks who are supporting the show and to everybody who supports this show. I really appreciate it. Whether you're supported by listening to the ad version or some people some people will support it and they get the ad-free version, but they listen to the ad anyway because they want to double support it. So I appreciate that. And then of course there are other ways to support the show as well, like when we try to help each other out. And I'll get to that in here in just a second. But I just wanted to let you know if you want to support the show, you can go to supportkilowatt.com. There is it takes you to a very fancy web page. It's not really that fancy. You can support the show through Supercast or Patreon. It gives you links, and eventually, as I get more time and some of these other things freed up, I'll start working on the website again and making that even better than it is now. But anyway, thank you, Steve, Bruce, Isaiah, Howard, and Bruce. Now, I mentioned that there were other ways to help support the show, and that's helping support one another. Last episode, Peter wrote in because he had a plug-in hybrid EV, and it was a Ford Escape that he purchased in December 2024, and he had some questions about the range that his car was reporting. It was less in the wintertime, and as it warmed up, got a little bit nicer outside, he noticed that his range was increasing, but he had had the car for a while. So is it the range increasing because of the warmer weather? Is the range increasing because the car is learning how he's driving and it's adapting? We have answers. We got 3 emails on this particular subject. So we're going to start with Mark. Mark writes, there are plenty of reports on cold weather loss in EVs. I can't see hybrids being any different. The loss can be up to 40% in some models, e.g. the Volkswagen ID4. Also, as you know, driving a car with regen is very different. So Peter may be losing some there. So that's good to know. And Mark wrote some other things about some of the other topics we talked about last week. But we're going to take what Mark has and we're going to build on that. Joe also wrote in and he had this to say. What the gentleman with the plug-in hybrid is most likely experiencing is a temperature-sensitive battery with no thermal management. Most batteries, including lead acid. Now, I do want to say Joe's not saying, because I don't want to get emails on this. Joe's not saying that the plug-in hybrid is a lead acid battery. He's saying most batteries, including lead acid, operate worst as the temperature drops and the chemical reactions slow down. With no thermal management in place, capacity can drop significantly in the cold. The range displayed on his vehicle is most likely based on capacity and a simple prediction formula. I'm not going to say it's not possible that Ford would also take into account driving habits for the calculation, but with such a short electric range, it wouldn't be worthwhile. It wouldn't be a worthwhile investment to put all that extra work in. So that's good information. I don't have anything to add there. Our final email comes from Friendly Sleet 66, who I've had a chance to get together and have some coffee with. Mr. 66 says, as I am bored at work and you mentioned my name on the podcast because he sponsored the last episode, I figured I would pass you my thoughts on the Escape plug-in hybrid EV range questions. Most of the below is obvious with a little implied insight on my part from writing software in the past. He starts off with, understand from news reports that Tesla's range calculation algorithm is complex and accounts for things like wind, weather, elevation differences, and many other things. Even my EVs, he has an i5 and a Nero, do not use any of the above info for their estimates that he's aware of. Expect for simple EVs like mine and this Ford Escape, the car's algorithm most likely is based on some weighted average of miles per kilowatts achieved over time and over a recent time interval, excuse me. This is really the only data the car has to make a simple calculation on expected range. So it uses that weighted average, the current state of charge of the battery, does the multiplication, and provides the number to the driver. Now, what things affect the weighted average of miles per kilowatt hour achieved over recent time intervals? I would expect all the things you mentioned, such as how the cold weather affects the battery, recent driving style aspects such as hills, cargo, towing of recent trips, recent battery performance. But again, the car is not likely measuring these things specifically. It's likely to just see the effects of those on the recent miles per kilowatt achieved. So I think this answers Peter's question. Peter, if you want to know more, send me an email and I'll try to get that information as well. But thank you very much to Mark, to Joe, and Friendly Sleet 66 for helping Peter out with some really good information. All right, let's start our news. Like I said, or I think I said this at the beginning of the show, we are going to cover delivery numbers. And like, I'm pretty sure I said this, so I'm just going to say, like I said, some of those delivery numbers were pretty good. Some of them weren't so good. We're going to start with XPeng, which is a Chinese automaker that we don't talk a lot about on this show. It's typically we talk about Geely, BYD, or NIO. But XPeng saw their Q2 2025 sales increase by 242% over the same time period last year. So XPeng this year delivered over 103,000 EVs in Q2 2025, and that puts them on track to deliver about 400,000 vehicles for the year. So that's great for XPeng. Now, I did mention NIO. NIO also had a pretty good quarter. NIO's sales are up 26%. It's not 242%, but it's 26% year over year. In Q2 2025, they were able to deliver 72,056 EVs. So if you're curious, because you've been listening to this podcast for long enough and you're like, I know that NIO has three brands. How did how did the sales numbers break down? Well, NIO branded cars sold 14,593 EVs, or delivered that many. The Envo, which is their mid-range brand, sold 6,400 EVs during that time period, and the Firefly sold 3,932. Firefly's that small compact vehicle that NIO started shipping, I think it was at the end of April. So they didn't get a full 3 months with the Firefly, and I think the Firefly is only currently in China. It's not being sold anywhere else. But overall, pretty good for NIO. Now let's go to our next automaker, which is GM. GM is still killing it. They grew sales 111% year over year in the second quarter of 2025. Here's what's weird, though. The delivery numbers that they gave, or the numbers sold that they gave, specifically say in the US. They don't talk about the cars that they sold in Canada or Mexico or any other places that GM is selling vehicles, which I know they're not really outside North America, but you know, they do sell cars in Canada. I'm wondering if the tariff fight between Canada and the United States, they didn't maybe want to announce those numbers that they sold in Canada or Mexico. But anyway, GM sold 46,280 EVs across all three GM brands, which are Chevy, Cadillac, and GMC. Now that brings us to Ford. Ford had a rough quarter. Their EV sales fell 31.4% in Q2 2025. So I'm gonna give you the number that they sold last year in the second quarter. They sold 23,957, so almost 24,000 cars. If you had to, I mean, I just gave you the number, doesn't matter. I was going to tell you if you had to guess what they sold this quarter, but because I told you the sales fell 31%. Yeah, they sold 16,438 EVs during that same time period. Ford claims that the decline in sales happened for two reasons. One, the Mach-E and F-150 Lightning were impacted by a changeover to the 2025 model year. And as one Ford executive put it, dealers can't sell cars that they don't have. And that does make sense. I don't know if that's the reason why they had a dip in sales, but that does make sense. The other reason is the Mach-E had a software recall last month in June, and that resulted in a stop sale. The recall actually affected 200,000 Mach-E models. The issue was you could actually get locked in your own vehicle, which I'm sure is not great. Um, that does probably impact sales. When Ford came out with the Mach-E, I was like, man, Ford is definitely serious about building EVs. This is a great car. Even with the limitations that the original Mach-E had, it was still a really good car. Um, but then they came out with the F-150 Lightning, and I was like, oh, dang, this is a great truck. Ford has got EVs figured out. And for whatever reason, over the last few years, Ford is starting to really flag on their EV sales. And that could be because of a couple different reasons. It could be that the F-150 Lightning and the Mach-E are too expensive. They're not cheap vehicles. It could, the Mach-E I think is probably pretty reasonable, but the F-150 Lightning, if you want one with decent range, it is an expensive car. Another issue is Ford just went super hard on the EV program. I can't remember what it was called, Blue or whatever it was, but they just went really hard, and they were going to make dealers spend, in some cases, millions of dollars to upgrade to DC fast chargers and make those available to people, just anybody come in and charge their vehicle. And, I don't know if that rubbed dealers the wrong way because ultimately Ford backed down. They were saying they weren't going to, but they ultimately backed down. Also, I don't know if the when the F-150 Lightning was kinda hard to get and dealers were marking it up a tremendous amount of money, I'm curious if that kinda hurt the brand, for EVs, even though Ford was like, "Don't do this, we'll pull your supply." Dealers were doing it. In some cases, they were marking it up close to 100%. And, it just kinda what went from what looked like great momentum in the EV space, kind of evaporated in the last couple of years, and that's disappointing, and I'd like to see Ford I would like to see what Ford's working on, or at least an announcement of what they've been working on in 2025, because right now they have 3 EVs. They have the E-Transit van, they have the Mach-E, and the F-150 Lightning. And if I'm wrong here, if I'm missing one, let me know, but I don't think I am. I know they've got hybrids, and, they did mention that they were going to, um, last year and maybe even the year before that during earnings calls, they mentioned that they'd be shifting some focus to hybrids, but I don't think they're even selling that many hybrids, to be honest with you. But not to say that the hybrids aren't great. I'm just saying, for whatever reason, Ford just seems to be. It seems like they were easily in that number two spot for North America for selling EVs behind Tesla, and they've just kind of let that. They just lost it. So that's disappointing. Anyway, let's talk, let's talk about another disappointing, quarter for a company, and that is Tesla. Tesla released its Q2 2025 production and delivery numbers today. Are you ready? They produced 396,000, almost 397,000 EVs or Model 3s and Model Ys. They delivered just under 374,000 Model 3s and Model Ys. So let's compare that to the second quarter of 2024, shall we? Model 3s and Model Ys, they produced in 2024, they produced 386,576 Model 3s and Model Ys. So when we compare the production numbers, they're close, 396 to 386, it's 10,000 difference. Then if we look at the delivered numbers in 2024, Q2 2024, they delivered 422,000 EVs, 422,405 Model 3s and Model Ys, and we're looking at 373,000 in Q2 2025. So that's a good size difference. When we are looking at, what is that, 50,000 less vehicles over the same time period. Am I doing that math right? 373, 422. Yeah, right around 50,000 vehicles. Now that brings us to other models, and other models includes Semi, Model S, Model X, and Cybertruck. They produced 13,409 vehicles, and they delivered 10,294 vehicles. So how does that compare to Q2 2024? It's a big difference. They produced in Q2 2024 24,255 vehicles. So we're talking like 9,000 more vehicles during that time period. They delivered 21,551. So 11,000 more vehicles delivered in that same time period. Tesla did confirm, which I thought this was weird, because they don't usually break out any of the sales, but they did break out the Cybertruck sales, and they said right now they are selling right about 5,000 units per quarter. That's not per month, that's per quarter. They're selling 5,000. So of the 10,294 EVs delivered or other vehicles delivered, 5,000, right around 5,000 of those went to Cybertruck. So we can assume a handful went to Tesla Semi, and then Model S and Model X, right around, we'll say 2,500 each. That is a very small number. That is not a lot of cars sold. In total produced for Q2 2025, Tesla produced just over 410,000 EVs. They delivered just over 384,000 EVs. So they overproduced by about, 26,000 EVs. My brain's not working so well. If we compare that same if we compare those same numbers to Q2 2024, so last year's numbers, they produced the same amount, roughly, just over 410,000 in 2024, but they delivered 443,000, almost 444,000 EVs. They did not do that in in Q2 2025. They're sitting like 60,000 less EVs this year than last year. So not great. If we could find a bright spot in Tesla's in their delivery numbers, they actually deployed 9.6 gigawatt hours of energy storage products, which the bright spot is it didn't really decline. That was about the same amount that they did last year. So there's our bright spot. And that's also the end of our show. I hope you all enjoyed it. Thank you very much again to Steve, Bruce, Isaiah, Howard, and Bruce for sponsoring this episode. Thank you to Mark, Joe, and Friendly Sleet 66 for answering Peter's question. And thank you to Peter for answering the question. And thank you to everybody who listens to the show. Thank you, one and all. I was going to do a Tiny Tim thing, but I can't remember the exact quote. So we'll just leave it. God bless us, everyone. 4th of July is on Friday here in North America. You will still be getting an episode. I will be working on that tomorrow, which would be Thursday the 3rd, which is, it's 12:15 a.m. So it's already the 3rd. I'll be working on that today. But anyway, I hope everybody has a happy and safe 4th of July. If you celebrate it here in the US, if you're somewhere else, it's just another day. But yeah, thank you so much. If you want to email me, you can do so. It's Bodie, BODIE at 918digital. You can also find me on X, which is 918digital, and you can go to the website, which is www.918digital.com. All right, I can feel myself getting dumber by the moment, so I'm just going to stop this before I become a complete idiot. So thanks so much. Talk to you soon.